Today on episode 21 of the Play Guitar podcast, I go through the best blues chords for guitar players. Having a solid knowledge of the blues is essential, so today I'm going to make sure you know the chords you need to play the blues. So stay tuned. Welcome to episode 21 of the Play Guitar podcast. I'm Lee, and this is the podcast that's determined to make you a better guitar player. No matter if you're just starting out or you've been playing for years, this is the show that'll help you become the guitarist you always wanted to be. On today's episode, I work my way through the chords you'll find when you're playing blues songs. Last week, I made the case for why you would want to be better versed in the blues, even if that's not the style that you're playing. But today I'm going to continue this mini series of playing the blues for guitar players with an overview of the chords of the blues. It's easy to think, well, the blues is so simple. It's probably not too difficult to play. But with any style of music, over time, it advances. The blues can go from very, very simple to very, very complicated pretty quickly. So since I suggested that you go ahead and start learning something, it's only fair if I help you get started, right? I think so. So today, it's all about getting you prepared for what you're going to find along the way to make sure you're knowledgeable about the chords that make up this style of music. Also, last week, I let you know about a free video lesson that I made available for you. It was at www.freeblueslesson.com. It's called Get Your Blues Soloing Under Control, and it's my lesson for you. It has the 6 steps I found that will give you the foundations for playing killer blues solos. And you can go ahead and watch it right now. If you go to that site, it will just ask you for your email address, and you'll be able to access the video. This will also make sure that you get sent all the info of my new content when it comes out as well. So today, after we get through the main topic, I'm going to talk a little bit about all of that. So definitely hang out with me today. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started with today's main topic. The best blues chords for guitar players. Welcome to part 2 of my mini blues series I'm doing here. Last week we talked about why learning the blues is so important for guitar players to learn. And you can check that out. That's at playguitarpodcast.com/020. But now I'm going to move on to the next step, blues chords. I'm going to go over each of the chords you'll run into when you're learning different blues tunes. And I think you'll be surprised at all the different chords that you'll find. Blues is commonly thought to be a super simple style of music. And if you thought that, you'd be right for the most part. The blues has a very simple structure, and at its most basic, it uses super simple chords. But like anything that gets played over and over for years and years, players they'll start to experiment, and they'll find ways to put their own spin on a song. That applies to the blues. Definitely applies. It has such a solid 12-bar structure that it's very easy to experiment with. Just take a look at a jazz blues progression. We talked about that last week, and you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll find diminished 7th chords, minor 7th chords, minor 7 flat 5 chords, and dominant chords of all shapes and sizes. 7 sharp 9s, 7 flat 9s, 9th chords, 13th. The sky's the limit. But at what point can you change the basic style of blues so much that it's not a blues anymore? I'm not sure exactly where that line stands, but that's a good question. And it's something I think I'm going to look into further someday. But for today, we're going to start with the most basic chords and then move on down the line. We're going to find the best chords to use with the blues and make sure we're all familiar with them. When I started out on guitar, I learned the same chords everybody else does. The open position, major, minor, and the seventh chords. And, they were a big struggle at first, like for everybody. But before long, I was doing all right with them. My fingers stopped hurting after a while, and I started learning some songs, and that's all I needed for a while. I was happy. But after that, I started listening to and enjoying some songs that had a lot of lead guitar in it. That quickly became all I wanted to play. I practiced my scale patterns and I worked on my phrasing a lot. I loved it. But when I started playing in bands, I came to a harsh realization. I had to play chords. I said, what? Play chords? That is not what I want to do. I just want to tear up some lead guitar. That's what I want to do. And so you mean to tell me that I have to play rhythm guitar? Well, if you think about it, if I just stood there during the whole song while the rest of the band was playing, just waiting for my time to play the solo, I would look very, silly, probably. But not all songs call for lead guitar to be played all the way through them. The bands that I was playing with, they needed me to do something constructive while I waited to play my guitar solos. So I needed to change my definition of what a lead guitar player was. It turns out that a lead guitar player is actually a rhythm guitarist who gets to play lead melodies for several seconds in each song. Now, some songs call for lead fills between the vocal lines, those, and that can sound great. But that's not the majority of the songs that I was playing. It especially became clear when I started playing in my three-piece band. Where I had to do the rhythm and the lead. Rhythm guitar was essential for that. Yep, even for lead guitar, unless you're like B.B. King or somebody who can pay somebody else to play all the chords for you, rhythm guitar is essential. So that completely changed my approach to the guitar, and it set me in a different direction. I needed to become great at rhythm. And as I worked on it, I started to love rhythm guitar. To my surprise, it helped my lead playing so much. I didn't realize that was going to happen, but knowing the different chords and how they were constructed, it changed my approach to lead guitar. I could use this knowledge to my advantage. I could outline the chord I was playing perfectly, or I could intentionally move away from those inside sounds and create some tension. It was a big step up in my playing, and I'm so much better off knowing all about chords and how they work. But no matter what direction you take as a guitarist, knowing the right chords to play makes all of the difference. And today we're going to get started with this. We're going to see what chords we need to be familiar with to play the blues. First, let's talk about positions. Blues chords are played in both the open and the barred positions. I know that once you move from the C's and G's and E minors, the open type chords, and when you move on from those into the bar chords, it's hard to go back. After getting over the initial pain of learning the bar chords, you start to be opened up to so many chord possibilities. But don't give up on those open position chords. Certain keys, especially of the blues, lend themselves really well to those open position chords, especially the keys of E, A, D, and G. Those in particular sound fantastic with open position chords. You can play these in these keys using bar chords, of course, but the full sound of open position chords with the root of the chord usually, on the very low string, and the increased sustain that you get of the open strings that ring, they give a very solid structure for you to base your rhythms on. Bar chords, though, are the most common that I've found while I'm playing the blues. It's just so easy to slide those common chord patterns up and down the neck into different keys. Plus, moving a chord up or down a fret, it can cause a little bit of a tension that's super cool, and it's very easy using those bar chords. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether you play open or bar chords, both can sound fantastic, but it's important that you have a solid understanding of both types. So let's move on to the types of chords you'll find when you're learning blues songs. The first type of chord that you'll find in the blues are triads. We talked about triads before. Triads are the simplest type of chords. They only contain 3 notes. And once you find the note of the major scale that you want to build a chord off of, you just add 2 more of those notes to it by skipping every other note of the scale. So for instance, to build a C major chord, you'd start with a C note. Then you'd skip the D and move to the E note. That'd be the next one. Then you skip the F and move to the G note. That's the third. The third note. That's the fifth, really, but that's the third one. So you have your C chord using the first, the third, and the fifth note of the scales, C, E, and G. Easy. The first type of triad we have in the blues are major chords. You know, major triads, the most basic chord progression in the blues, that simple 12-bar blues. It only uses 3 different chords. Here's the 3 chords you'll find in the blues. First is a chord that's formed on the first degree of the scale, commonly called the 1 chord. Then you have a chord that's formed from the 4th degree of the scale. That's commonly called the 4 chord. And last but not least, a chord that is formed from the 5th degree of the scale. That's called the 5th chord. 5 chord, excuse me. That's the 1-4-5 chord progression. These 3 chords are the basis for so many songs, and not just the 12-bar blues. You can go from country, crying in your beer type songs to soul, R&B, reggae, all the way to rock and heavy metal. It's the most common combination of chords I've seen in popular music. It just so happens that there's a good reason for this. They're the strongest sounds in the diatonic scale. They're so strong, they even have fancy names. The chord built off the 1st degree is called the tonic chord. The chord built off the 4th degree, that's the subdominant chord. And then the chord built off the 5th degree is the dominant chord. But you don't have to know the fancy names to get started using these chords. Let's take a look about how you can use the simple major triad to play the blues. So let me grab my guitar here. There it is. And let's see here. We get this thing. Oh, there we go right there. So let's play some blues using only triads. So here's, let's do it in the key of, let's pick key of G today. So. So for that progression, I just used the major triads for all the chord choices. I had a G major chord, then a C major chord, and then the D major chord was in there as well. Super easy. And it's something you've heard a lot, especially in acoustic blues and slide blues music. The simple sound without using the common chord that you find in the blues, the dominant, the flat 7th chords, but just using these major triads really brings the blues down to its most basic sound. In slide blues guitar, because a lot of times most times in slide blues, you use an open tuning. And the guitar is usually tuned, all the strings are tuned to a major triad. And to try and hit those chords with the slide, it just spans the fret. It just hits those major triad notes. It's pretty tough to add anything else to those other than the major triad. So you hear those all the time in slide sounds. Okay, so that's the major triad. The next triad you will find in the blues is the minor triad. In chord progressions like The Thrill Is Gone, you'll find the minor triad being used for the 1 and for the 4 chord. With the turnaround usually at the end, that usually uses some other 7th chords of some fashion. But I've seen the same minor blues songs played with minor triads one way, and sometimes they'll use a minor 7th chord, which we'll talk about later, another way. It's not that big of a change between the two, other than that the minor 7th chord, which we'll talk about later, is a little more complex sound than just a plain minor chord. So let's hear it. Let's do the same key, G, but this time we'll do minor. So here. So that used the G minor triad for the one chord, the 4 chords, a C minor triad, and I did an E flat 9 chord, a dominant E flat 9 to a D9 chord for the turnaround, and then back to a G minor chord. Okay, so that's the minor. So the other triad you'll come across in the blues is the augmented triad. Well, what is that? The augmented triad is a set of 3 notes, all separated by the space of a major third, or 4 frets between each note. To do that easier, just raise the 5th degree of a major triad. Very easy. The augmented, it's got a floaty, dreamy kind of sound. It's not common in popular music. It's not. But where you will find it a lot is in blues songs. It's in the beginning of a lot of songs. It's the first chord in Stormy Monday, and in a lot of old 50s type songs, and a few Beatles songs. So here's what that sounds like. You probably heard this before. Sound familiar? It's in a lot of songs. And then, right, they start with that augmented chord that leads you back to the 1 chord to start the song. Pretty neat. That's what you'll find that a lot in blues. Okay, so triads sound fine, but they're a little plain. Let's get bluesier. Let's get those sounds that are on most of the classic blues songs. Let's play some 7th chords. So what are 7th chords? Don't worry, 7th chords are easy. We just continue the process that we used before to figure out the triads, the skipping every note thing. So the triad finds its root note, then it adds every other note of the scale. You hop the notes until you have 3 notes for your triad. Well, to get a 7th chord, we just need to do that one more time. We want to skip every other note until we have the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, and now the 7th. You see that? When we skip every other note and add one more time, that note is the 7th degree of the scale. Hence the name 7th chords. But there isn't just one kind of 7th chord, and the blues uses several types of 7th chords. So hold on. That's where we're going next. The most common 7th chord is called the dominant 7th chord. Now get ready for this. This is a little confusing at first, but once you get it, it's very easy. It's just a little bit of a workaround here. So the whole group of 4-note chords, where we skip every other note 4 times, the whole group is called 7th chords. But what confuses a lot of people is that the common name for the dominant 7th chord, which is just one of the several types of 7th chords, is the same. They call that the 7th chord. And what makes it even more confusing is that the dominant 7th chord is created by lowering that note. The note we added from the major scale, the 7th chord, lowering that 1 half step. So it is essentially a flat 7th chord. The notes in that chord are 1, 3, 5, and flat 7th. This grouping of notes gives it's a very distinctive sound. So when you see like a G7, one of these, that you learn when you first start playing the G7 in a chord book, that chord is really a G triad with a flat 7th note in there, which is that F note on the top that everybody has a hard time playing at first. That you get the chicken clucks before you get that. Okay, are you confused yet? So if someone is playing a 7th chord or a flat 7th chord or a dominant 7th chord, they're all the same chord. Brilliant, right? I had learned this so long ago that I don't really think about it much. I've just accepted it. But I remember when I first learned this and how ridiculous and confusing it was. But this is how it is. And what makes it easy is that the dominant 7th sound has a very distinctive sound. Hear that? Sounds familiar. It should. It's like used in every funk and blues song ever. I'm exaggerating, but that's the sound of a 7th chord. And on its own, to me, this chord on its own, this is a G7, it sounds kind of unsettled. It sounds like it wants to go somewhere else. It wants to resolve maybe to, right? Something like that. G7 to C. That sounds nice. But in the blues, it's the most common chord, the dominant seventh, all on its own. It doesn't have to resolve to anything. And it's used for each of the chords in the 12-bar blues progression. So if we had 12-bar blues, we would play G7, C7, and D7 like this. Adding that flat seventh to each of the chords gives some really cool tension to a style of music that the blues needs a little tension anyway. With the dominant chord sounding like it needs to move somewhere else, it also really sets up a little bit of movement between the 1, the 4, and the 5 chords. Just perfect for the 12-bar blues. There are too many songs that use seventh chords for me to come up with here to let you know. But try listening to Let the Good Times Roll by B.B. King, or If You Love Me Like You Say from Albert Collins. Those are some great examples of the dominant seventh chord in the blues. Okay, the next type of chord you'll find in the blues is the minor seventh chord. The minor seventh chord uses a minor triad instead of a major triad this time. And when we add the last note, the seventh, it's flatted just like the dominant seven. It'll be a flat seven. So the only difference between the minor seventh chord and the dominant seventh chord is that the minor seventh chord has a flat third. That's what makes it minor. So you'd have 1, flat 3, 5, and flat 7. That's the minor seventh chord. Super easy. If you remember from before, when I talked about using the minor triad in the blues earlier, I said that you'll hear a minor seventh chord played sometimes instead of the triad. So I'm going to play that same minor blues that I played earlier, but this time I'm going to use minor seventh chords, and you see if you can hear the difference from before. You hear this a lot, and it's a great sound. The minor seventh it's a sad, but it's a pretty sound. It's very complex. I love to use the minor seventh chord a lot. The last common seventh chord that you'll find in the blues is the diminished seventh. The diminished seventh chord is built from minor third intervals, or you just go every 3 frets. So you have a 1, a flat 3, a flat 5, and a double flat seventh. That's right, a double flat. C diminished seventh chord has the note C. Here's a C, E flat, G flat, and A. Or you could call that a B double flat if you want to be fancy. And it sounds like this. Okay? I usually find this chord in the blues in one place, and that is measure 6 of the 12-bar blues. This is where you've gone to the 4 chord, and it normally would last for 2 bars. But now the 4 is followed by a sharp 4 diminished seventh. That means a diminished seventh 1 fret up from that chord. The diminished seventh chord makes a very smooth passing transition back to the 1 chord on bar 7, and it's very common in jazz blues. Okay, so I'm going to play this. This is our key of G like we were playing in before. Here it is. Hear that? It went really nicely back to that 1 chord. on that sixth bar, that C7, went to a C sharp diminished 7. Or, let's see, C sharp diminished. Okay, it's a really cool sound, and a good understanding of this chord is a great first step into more advanced harmony over the blues. So there they are. Those are the different seventh chords that you'll normally find in a blues song. And learning these chords in many different voicings all over the neck, that's going to be a big job. But once you start trying to master these chords in different areas of the guitar, you might start to hear something surprising. Sometimes a dominant seventh chord played in a certain area, it might remind you of a certain song or a certain guitar player. I know that when I started learning the dominant seventh voicings on the top four strings, so on the D, the G, the B, and the E string, I found something very cool. The voicing that looks like that open position D7 chord, this one right here. When you move it up, play it as a bar chord, it has a very familiar sound to me. It has a very kind of Eric Clapton acoustic blues. When you play that voicing of the dominant seventh, it's got the let's see. Oh, there's another one too that I like. Another voicing of a dominant seventh chord that has the flat seventh on the high E string. It's kind of like an A chord, but with you play the G note on the high E string on top of an A chord. When you play this voicing, it sounds very Stevie Ray Vaughan to me, you know. You know, that kind of stuff. So sliding these voicings around, when you start playing around with these chords and you put them into new keys, you can borrow some of these sounds that you hear and that you like, and you can put them into new songs and new styles of your own playing. So you may be wondering, all right, those are the basics, and you probably knew a little bit of those, but how about something more advanced? Something that has a bit more harmony to it. Okay, that means we're going to have to talk about something new. We're going to have to talk about extensions. Ooh, that sounds good. What are extensions? Well, up to this point, we've been dealing with the meat and potatoes of the chords. You know, the first, the third, the fifth, and the seventh, building those seventh chords. These are the functional notes of the chords that we find in the blues. But I'm sure you've heard some more complex chords in some songs. Some chords that sound a little out there, but still very cool. What we are going to do is we're going to add some new colors to these chords. We're going to dress them up a bit. In the chords that we've already talked about, the notes that we've covered, the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7, you know, skipping every note, that's important. Those are the important notes. But if we change one of those notes, it becomes a whole new kind of chord. The whole function of the chord changes. The whole way the chord works changes. For example, if we lower the third of a major triad just one half step, it now becomes a minor triad. If it's saying the key of C, we did C, E, G. If we lower that third, that E note, to an E flat, it becomes a minor triad. Those two chords are worlds apart. But they're only different by one note, one half step. That's pretty cool to me. I always thought that was cool. But what if we didn't want to change the function of the chord? We wanted it to work normally. We just wanted to dress it up a bit. We wanted to give it a new coat of paint. How would we go about doing that? Well, what are we going to do? What have we been doing before? We keep skipping notes. Well, we're just going to keep doing what we were doing before. Okay, skipping notes. Let's see. We went from the first note of the scale, 1. We skipped 1 to the third. That was another chord note. Then we skipped another one to the 5th note of the scale. And then that was the triad. And then we added to that. We skipped another. So we got to the 7th. So the first note, the third note, the 5th note, and the 7th note of the scale, gave us the notes for our 7th chord. So let's skip again. Okay, wait, how will we do that? There's only 7 notes in the scale, with the 8th note being where it starts over. That's the octave, right? Or 1 again. So if we skipped a note after 7, where would it go? The next note is back to 1, so where would it go to 2? So let's figure this out with Old Faithful, the C major scale. Let's put the C major scale down 2 times, twice. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and then again, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, all in a line. Okay. Next time you have, I don't know where you are listening to this, but next time when you have paper and a pencil, try this out. But I'm going to spell it out for us here. So we've got C to C 2 times. Okay, now that we have that, let's give the first half of that its numbers, just like we did before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, A is 6, B is 7, and then we go back to C again. When we get to the second set of scale notes, we're just going to keep going with the numbers. So C will now be 8. D will be 9. This is the second set now. E will be 10. F will be 11. G will be 12. A will be 13. B 14. And just on and on up there. We'll stop right there now. Okay, so that's set up for us now. Okay, so we're going to start skipping now. Start skipping. So we've got the 1, C, right? We'll skip the next one. We got our next note, E. Next note, G. And a B. And then we're going to skip another one this time. Now we're going to go to the 9th, which is the same as the second, but we're going to call it the 9th now, which is a D. How about that? So we've got a 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 now. So you can think of these chord tones like they're in order of importance. 1 is the root. That's the important one, right? The third note that when we skip, that is the note that lets you know whether it's major or minor or not. Okay. The 5th is kind of a thickening sound for the chord. And then the 7th determines whether the chord is a dominant, like a flat 7 or not. But what about our new note, the 9th? What does that do? It's a color note. It is definitely less important than the other notes. It's just decoration. But you know what? It sounds good. When you put a 9th together with a dominant chord, our C, E, G, B flat, and then you add the D, you get what's called a 9th chord. And this chord is all over the blues. It has a wonderful sound. It's the sound of James Brown. You know, that kind of sound. It's a wonderful sound. It's great. It functions exactly like a dominant 7th chord. It's just a little prettier. So here's a C7 and here's a C9. Pretty nice, right? In fact, it's up to you whether you want to play one, if you want to play at a dominant 7th or if you want to play a C9. It's up to you. They're interchangeable. It just depends if that certain sound of the 9th works for the song that you're playing. You may have also heard of something called a 13th chord and you thought, oh my God, what is that? But let's keep going. Let's keep doing what we were doing. If we kept skipping 2 more times from that 9th, right? We just keep going every other note. We would have 1 is C, 3 is E, 5 is G, the flat 7th is B flat, then the 9th is D, 11th is F, and then one more to the 13th. That's an A note. That 13th right there, that's the A note. That's another color note that doesn't change the function of the dominant 7th chord, but you hear it a lot in blues, and it sounds awesome. Hear that A? Oh, this isn't G. That's not an A. That's an E in the key of G, but that's the 13th right there. It's a very distinctive sound, and it works very well in certain songs. And like Stormy Monday is one that uses that sound of the 13th an awful lot. So just by skipping every other note over the major scale, we can start to get so many different kinds of chords. And if you just start to think this way of constructing chords from the scale instead of just memorizing shapes and patterns, you're going to start to really understand how these notes work together and how they lead into each other. Not only that, but to go even further, you can start to change these extensions to get different sounds. I told you it gets complex after a while. So let's use the ninth as an example. Over those seventh chords we were playing, you can raise or lower the ninth to get different colors over your seventh chords. There's a 7 sharp 9 chord where you take the ninth and raise it 1. And there's a 7 flat 9. Okay. How about that? So that's a G7 sharp 9, G7 flat 9. Those are pretty common chords. You're probably familiar with the first one, the 7 sharp 9 sound. You've ever heard Jimi Hendrix before. And let me play any. Yeah, Jimi Hendrix. It still functions like a 7th chord. It just has a different coat on. Probably one that like Hendrix wore. It had like all the fringes and tassels. Anyway, so there it is. My super quick synopsis of the chords that you're going to run into when you start really learning the blues. What do you think? It's a lot to take in, I know, but if anything, I hope I explained it in a way that you start to see how these things are used and why they work the way they do. We learned that you can play the blues in open and in bar chord positions. We also learned that the blues can be played with triads, major, minor, and even that augmented is there sometimes. It can be played with 7th chords, the dominant 7th, the minor 7th, and the diminished 7th. And we learned all about extended chords, why they work, and why they sound great over blues songs. So tell us about your experience with blues chords. Which ones do you see the most, and what are your favorite ones to play? We would all love to hear from you. So just leave a comment in the show notes on www.playguitarpodcast.com/021. This is usually where I have listener feedback, but not today. But if you do have a comment or a question that I can help you with, remember that you can always email me at feedback@playguitarpodcast.com or just let me know on Twitter at playguitarpdcst, and I'd be happy to help you out. But this week, I've been very busy, and I just want to kind of let you in on the goings on of this week. So I finally got this free blues soloing lesson ready for you this week. I had a great time doing it, and it was a great time to get it done because it coincides with this mini series that I'm doing on the podcast about the blues. I've been getting in touch with a few of the listeners and talking to them, listening to them, asking questions about what they thought could help them out the most, and getting that was the inspiration for the video, which is Get Your Blues Soloing Under Control. I just sat down after the week of getting to know a bunch of different listeners, and I wrote down what I thought would be the things that could help them like today, like right now. And it was great fun, and I'm really happy with how the video came out. But once I had it up on the internet, I had several issues about the best way to deliver it. So just to get it up there, in time for the show last week, I got the link for freeblueslesson.com, and I just directed that to a Vimeo page, a video page. And that turned out to be a little iffy. Some were able to see it, and some people had some problems. And so I started to redesign the whole process, and as I'm doing that, I started reading up about these new, the EU laws. I think it's GDPR laws that about these kind of things. So I know I have a lot of listeners in the EU, so I wanted to make sure I was compliant with that. And I think the 25th is when all that kicks in. So I went back to the drawing board, and even still, I'm going to get everything compliant for all that to take place by the 25th. But a long story short, if you had any problems accessing the video, I have a new process to view it. And, if you are successful the first time signing up, just check your email. I've sent you a new link that goes straight to the video. And everything is much easier now. And it's been working well for several days now. So I'm pretty confident in it right now. But I just want to say thank you for all the great feedback about the video. And I'm so happy that it seems to be helping. This is my first step in starting to bring this new free video content to you. So if you signed up this week, you can expect me to alert you to all the new video content. I'll send you an email about every new video content that I have coming out this summer, along with some other special cool stuff that I have planned. So thanks to all of you again, and thank you for being patient with me this week as I start getting this ball rolling. It's been a very exciting time here. So that's a wrap. Thank you for joining me today for the Play Guitar Podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show on iTunes or your podcast player. Also, I'd appreciate it if you could leave me an iTunes review for the show. If you're interested in online lessons, go on to playguitaracademy.com and join my early adopter list to get news on the opening of the site and an early adopter discount. And also follow me on all my different social media pages. Links to them are at www.playguitarpodcast.com. Thank you again, and I will see you on the next episode.